My wife, the CEO, threw her pen on the floor at the board meeting and said, "Pick it off the ground." The whole tables laughed. I didn't say a word. That evening, my wife called, "I've chosen to sever all contact. Stay away forever." I replied, "You will regret it." By midnight, the company group erupted in panic, as the company value dropped by 95%. 540 missed calls. The conference room smelled like fake confidence and overpriced cologne with just a hint of desperation masquerading as ambition. You know the type of place. Mahogany table that probably cost more than a sedan. Leather chairs that squeaked every time someone shifted their weight to check their Rolex, and a view of the city skyline that screamed, "We're important." Louder than a motivational poster at a used car dealership. I was sitting in my usual spot, the one closest to the door, which I'd long ago accepted was the corporate equivalent of the kids' table at Thanksgiving. My wife, Clara Jennings, sat at the head of the table like she was born there, which honestly she might as well have been. The woman could make a throne out of a folding chair and still look like she was judging your entire bloodline. Clara was in full Queen of Wall Street mode today, which meant her blazer was sharp enough to cut glass. Her hair was pulled back so tight I wondered if it gave her migraines. And her expression suggested she'd rather be literally anywhere else, but was contractually obligated to tolerate our existence. This was the quarterly report meeting for Jennings & Company, the tech consulting firm that bore her family name and my blood, sweat, and about 7 years of unpaid labor. But hey, who's counting? Oh, right, me. I'm always counting. I was there for one reason and one reason only. Because I built the company's entire tech backbone. Every server, every algorithm, every automated system that made this place run smoother than Clara's PR-approved smile. Did I get credit for it? Sure. In the same way the guy who invented the intermittent windshield wiper got credit, technically acknowledged, never actually celebrated, and definitely not compensated appropriately. But Clara had assured me early on that equity in marriage is better than equity in business, which I later realized was corporate speak for "I'm not putting your name on anything." Around the table sat the usual suspects. There was Richard Peaton, the CFO, who looked like he'd been born in a Brooks Brothers and sustained himself purely on black coffee and the tears of interns. Next to him was Diane Kowalski, VP of Operations, who had the personality of a spreadsheet and the warmth of a tax audit. Then there was Marcus Chun, the marketing director, who spent more time perfecting his Instagram aesthetic than actually marketing anything. And finally, Clara's personal assistant, Bethany, who had mastered the art of laughing at her boss's jokes approximately 0.3 seconds before anyone else to maintain job security. Clara was midway through the quarterly report, rattling off numbers that meant the company was doing well, thanks to the system I'd built that basically ran itself at this point when it happened. Her platinum pen, the one she'd special ordered from some boutique in Manhattan that probably charged by the letter for engraving, rolled off the glossy surface of the table. It tumbled in slow motion, like a dramatic scene in a movie where everyone knows something terrible is about to happen, but can't look away. The pen hit the carpet with the softest little thud and rolled naturally directly toward my shoe. The room went quiet. Not the thoughtful kind of quiet, but the someone just ripped one in an elevator kind of quiet. Clara's eyes, those ice blue weapons of mass destruction, tracked the pin's journey, and then landed on me. Not near me, not in my general direction. On me, like a sniper locking onto a target. "Pick it up," she said. 2 words, just 2 simple words. But the way she said them, like I was the help, like I was some random dude who'd wandered in off the street instead of her husband of 8 years who built the very platform she was using to present her little PowerPoint, made my jaw clench so hard I thought I might crack a mare. The entire boardroom froze. Richard's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. Diane's fingers hovered over her keyboard. Marcus looked like he was trying to decide if he should film this for LinkedIn or pretend he was suddenly very interested in the ceiling tiles. Then they laughed. Not nervous laughter, not "oh wow, that was awkward" laughter. Full-on knee-slapping, tears in the eyes laughter. Bethany snorted like a malfunctioning printer, which triggered another wave of giggles around the table. Even Richard, who I'd never seen smile in 3 years, was grinning into his coffee like he'd just witnessed the funniest thing since his portfolio doubled. I looked at the pen. I looked at Clara. I looked at the faces around the table, all of them waiting to see what I'd do. Part of me, the petty, vindictive part that had been taking notes for years, wanted to kick the pen under the table and watch her dive for it in her 1,000 heels. Another part of me, the part that still had to sleep in the same house as this woman, knew that would only make things worse. So, I did what I'd become embarrassingly good at over the years. I smiled politely, bent down, picked up the pen, and placed it gently on the table in front of her. "There you go, Your Majesty," I said, keeping my tone light and my smile plastered on like I was auditioning for a toothpaste commercial. That just made them laugh harder. Marcus actually slapped the table. Diane covered her mouth, but her shoulders were shaking. Richard muttered something that sounded like domesticated under his breath, which earned him a sharp look from Clara, but not sharp enough to make him take it back. Bethany had to excuse herself because she was laughing so hard she was crying, which I personally thought was overkill, but what do I know about performative corporate siffy? Clara took the pen without a word, without even a nod of acknowledgement, and continued her presentation like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just publicly reduced her husband to the status of a foot tool in front of the entire executive team. Like this was just another Tuesday in the glamorous life of Clara Jennings, CEO extraordinaire. But here's the thing about humiliation. It has a funny way of clarifying things. As I sat there listening to her drone on about projected growth and market penetration and synergistic partnerships, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not even hurt, something colder, something more focused inside. Even as my face maintained that same pleasant smile, I knew something with absolute certainty. Something big was about to break. And it wouldn't be me this time. I'd spent years building systems, creating fail-safes, embedding backdoors into code that only I understood. Clara thought she owned this company. Thought she owned me. But you can't own what you don't understand. And she'd never understood what I'd built. She'd never cared to learn. So I sat there nodding at the appropriate moments while my mind raced through lines of code, access points, and one particular function I'd buried deep in the architecture years ago. A little insurance policy I told myself I'd never use. Turns out never is a pretty flexible timeline. The ride home in Clara's Mercedes was a masterclass in awkward silence. The kind that makes you want to turn the radio up to 11 just to have something, anything, to fill the void. But Clara had turned the radio off the moment we got in the car, which I'd learned over the years meant she was either furious, scheming, or both. Probably both. The leather seats, which normally smelled like luxury and success, today smelled like tension and the lingering ghost of her perfume. Something French and expensive that probably cost more per ounce than I'd spent on groceries last month. She was texting someone, her thumbs flying across her phone screen with the intensity of a court stenographer during a murder trial. I tried to sneak a glance at who warranted such urgent attention, but she angled the phone away like I was trying to steal state secrets. For all I knew, maybe I was. Could have been her PR manager. Could have been her personal trainer. Could have been Lucifer himself confirming their weekly brunch plans. With Clara, you never really knew who was in her inner circle on any given day. Her contacts list probably had more turnover than a fast food joint. I cleared my throat, deciding to be the bigger person. So, I think that presentation went well, I said, going for casual and landing somewhere around desperate. The Q3 numbers were solid. The new client acquisition metrics were particularly. She held up one finger without looking at me. One finger, the universal symbol for shut up. I'm busy with important things, and you are not an important thing. I watched that perfectly manicured finger hover in the air between us, like a tiny middle finger to my entire existence. And I felt my jaw clench for the second time that day. I was going to need a mouth guard at this rate, right? Yeah, no problem, I muttered, turning to look out the window. As we merged onto the highway, the city lights blurred past. All those other people in all those other cars probably having normal conversations with their spouses about what to have for dinner or whose turn it was to take out the trash. Meanwhile, I was sitting here getting the silent treatment like I was a teenager who'd missed curfew, not a grown man who'd just been publicly humiliated by his wife in front of her entire executive team. I tried again about 10 minutes later because apparently I'm a glutton for punishment. Did you want to stop anywhere? We could grab takeout. That Thai place you like is on the way. The one with the no, she said, not looking up from her phone. Just no. Not no, thank you, or I'm not hungry, or even I'd rather eat glass than prolong this car ride. Just a flat dead no that somehow managed to convey that my suggestion was not only unwelcome but actively offensive to her sensibilities. Cool, I said, nodding like an idiot. Home it is then. She didn't respond. Her phone buzzed. She typed something back and then she actually smiled. A real genuine smile that I hadn't seen directed at me in probably 6 months. Whoever was on the other end of those texts was getting the good Clara, the one who laughed at jokes and had personality and didn't treat people like sentient furniture. I wondered what that was like. I used to know back when we were dating, back when she looked at me like I was someone worth looking at. The highway stretched on. I counted exit signs to pass the time. We passed billboard after billboard. Personal injury lawyers promising maximum compensation. Fast food chains advertising deals I'd never take advantage of. A weirdly aggressive ad about gutter cleaning that seemed more threatening than informative. Anything to avoid focusing on the fact that my wife and I were sharing a confined space and somehow I'd never felt more alone. By the time we pulled into our driveway, our being generous since the house was in her name, purchased with her family money and decorated according to her taste, it was almost 7:30. The house was one of those modern minimalist nightmares that looked like it belonged in an architecture magazine and felt about as warm as the magazine's glossy pages. All sharp angles, floor-to-ceiling windows, and furniture that looked expensive but felt like sitting on decorative rocks. Clara loved it. I'd learned to tolerate it. She was out of the car before I'd even unbuckled my seat belt, her heels clicking against the concrete with the efficiency of someone who had much more important places to be. I grabbed my messenger bag from the back seat and followed her in, locking the car because someone had to remember these things. Our house was in a nice neighborhood, the kind where people jogged with expensive strollers and had landscapers with names like Eduardo or Chin's Premium Lawn Service. But still, you lock the car. It's common sense. Inside, Clara didn't even break stride. She went straight to her study. The room I wasn't allowed in without explicit permission. The one with the door that was always locked when she wasn't in it and slammed it behind her hard enough to rattle the abstract art piece in the hallway. The one that looked like someone had sneezed paint onto a canvas and then charged $4,000 for it. I stood in the foyer for a moment listening to the lock click into place and wondered what exactly I'd done to deserve the cold shoulder treatment. Besides apparently I looked at my watch. 7:45. My stomach growled, reminding me that the sad continental breakfast at this morning's meeting, stale croissants and coffee that tasted like regret, had been my only food today. I dropped my bag by the door, walked into our designer kitchen with its marble countertops and appliances that looked like they belonged on a spaceship and opened the fridge. The glow of the interior light felt judgmental somehow, like even the refrigerator was disappointed in my life choices. I made dinner anyway because why not? Someone had to feed the royal ego. And if Clara was going to hold up in her study until midnight, she'd eventually emerge demanding food like a dragon, expecting tribute. I pulled out pasta, some cherry tomatoes, garlic, olive oil, and fresh basil that was probably a week past its prime, but would work. Cooking was one of the few things I did that Clara occasionally praised. Usually when we had guests and she needed to show off her well-rounded husband who cooks. As I chopped garlic and put water on to boil, I thought about the meeting, about the pen, about the laughter, about how Richard had called me domesticated like I was a golden retriever who'd learned a cute trick. The knife thudded against the cutting board in a steady rhythm that was almost meditative. Chop, chop, chop. Each cut felt therapeutic, like I was slicing through more than just garlic. By 8 p.m., I was sitting at our dining table, an 8-seater monstrosity that we'd used for exactly 2 dinner parties in 3 years, eating pasta alone. The chair across from me was empty. The chair next to me was empty. All the chairs were empty except mine. I twirled spaghetti around my fork and tried to remember the last time Clara and I had eaten a meal together that didn't involve clients or networking or maintaining appearances for someone else's benefit. I couldn't. After dinner, I cleaned up because leaving dishes in the sink would result in a passive-aggressive text the next morning about basic household responsibilities. Then I grabbed my laptop, settled onto the couch, the one piece of furniture I'd actually gotten to choose, a comfortable sectional that Clara tolerated because it was adequately neutral, and opened Google. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a second before I typed. Is marriage supposed to feel like customer service? The search results were depressingly numerous. Relationship advice blogs, Reddit threads with titles like, "Am I the only one?" And "Does anyone else feel like their spouse's employee?" And even a few academic articles about emotional labor in modern marriages. I clicked through a few reading stories from other people who felt exactly like I did, undervalued, taken for granted, more like staff than partners. One comment stuck with me. If you're constantly asking yourself if this is normal, that's your answer. It's not. I closed the laptop and stared at the ceiling. From Clara's study, I could hear her on a phone call, her voice muffled, but animated. She was laughing at something. That laugh used to be for me. Now it was for board members and investors and whoever the hell she'd been texting in the car. The house settled around me, all its expensive emptiness pressing in. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a plan was beginning to form. Not concrete yet, just the shadow of an idea, but it was there waiting. I just didn't know yet how soon I'd need it. I'd moved from the couch to my desk around 9:30. Partially because sitting in the living room staring at nothing was getting depressing, and partially because I needed to check some code I'd been working on for a client project. Well, client project was generous. It was more like a side hustle I'd been developing in secret. Something that had nothing to do with Jennings and Company and everything to do with maintaining my sanity. When you spend your days building someone else's empire for free, you start thinking about building your own. The house had settled into its usual nighttime rhythm, which is to say it was quiet as a tomb, except for the occasional creak of expensive wood flooring adjusting to temperature changes. Clara was still locked in her study, probably on her third conference call of the evening with investors in different time zones, or maybe practicing her TED talk about female entrepreneurship that conveniently left out the part where her husband built the actual product she was selling. I had my headphones on, some Lo-fi Beats playlist that was supposed to help concentration, and I was actually getting into a decent flow when my phone lit up on the desk. 10:42 p.m. Clara's name flashed across the screen. I stared at it for a second, confused. She was literally 30 feet away down the hall in her study. Why would she be calling me? Had something happened? Was the house on fire and she couldn't be bothered to walk over and tell me in person? With Clara, anything was possible. I pulled off my headphones and answered, "Hello, I've chosen to sever all contact. Stay away forever." Her voice came through the speaker cold and rehearsed like she'd practiced this line in the mirror a few times to get the delivery just right. It had that quality of a prepared statement, the kind politicians read after a scandal breaks. Formal, distant, completely devoid of anything resembling human emotion. I laughed. I actually laughed because what else do you do when your wife calls you from 30 feet away to deliver what sounds like dialogue from a particularly dramatic soap opera? What? Like a trial separation, I said, still half convinced this was some kind of weird joke or stress-induced breakdown. "Clara, are you okay? Did something happen?" "No," she said, and I could hear her take a breath. The kind you take before delivering news you know is going to land like a bomb, like you don't exist. The laughter died in my throat. I pulled the phone away from my ear for a second, looked at the screen to confirm I was actually talking to my wife and not some prank caller, then put it back. "I'm sorry." "What? You're calling me from your study to tell me I don't exist?" "Clara, this is insane. If you want to talk about what happened today, we can." "There's nothing to talk about." She cut me off, her voice sharp as a paper cut. "I've made my decision. This marriage is over. I want you out of the house by the end of the week. My lawyer will contact you about the details." I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, trying to process what I was hearing. End of the week. Lawyer. This wasn't a conversation. It was a corporate termination. She was firing me from our marriage like I was an underperforming employee who'd failed to meet quarterly expectations. Part of me wondered if she had a PowerPoint presentation prepared for this too, complete with pie charts showing the decline of our relationship metrics over time. "So that's it," I said, keeping my voice level even though my heart was doing this weird thing where it felt like it was beating both too fast and too slow at the same time. 8 years and you're ending it with a phone call while you're in the next room. You can't even look at me. "I don't need to look at you," she said, "this isn't a discussion. It's a notification." A notification like I was some app on her phone she was deleting to free up storage space. I felt something cold settle in my chest, replacing whatever remnants of affection or loyalty or stupid hopeful optimism I'd been clinging to. It was a strange feeling like watching something die in real time and realizing you didn't feel sad about it. You felt relieved. Relieved that you didn't have to pretend anymore. Relieved that the shoe had finally dropped after hovering overhead for months, maybe years. I paused, let the silence stretch between us. In the background of her call, I could hear her shifting in her leather desk chair, probably checking her watch, calculating how much time this tedious conversation was taking away from more important matters. When I spoke again, my voice was calm. Too calm. "Okay," I said simply. I could almost hear her blinking in surprise on the other end. She'd probably expected tears or begging or anger, some kind of emotional reaction she could later describe to her friends over brunch as proof that I was unstable or difficult. Instead, I gave her nothing. "Okay," she repeated, suspicious. "Yeah, okay. If that's what you want, that's what you'll get." I leaned back in my chair, looking at the lines of code on my screen. Beautiful, logical, predictable code. Unlike people, code did exactly what you told it to do. "But you might want to keep your phone charged tonight." There was a beat of silence. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I said, and I could hear the smile in my own voice, even though I wasn't entirely sure when it had appeared. "Just general life advice. You never know when something important might come up. Would hate for you to miss it." "Are you threatening me?" Her voice went up an octave. That carefully controlled CEO persona cracking just enough to let some actual emotion through because if you think you can threatening you Clara please. "I'm just saying it's a good idea to stay connected. You're a busy woman. Important calls to take, emergencies to handle, that sort of thing." I was being deliberately vague, which I knew would drive her crazy. Clara hated not being the smartest person in the room. Hated not understanding exactly what was happening at all times. "Anyway, thanks for the heads up about the whole divorce thing. Very professional. Very you." "Don't." She started. But I was done. Good night, Clara. Sleep tight. Don't let the bed bugs bite or the market volatility or whatever it is that keeps CEOs up at night. I hung up before she could respond, which felt better than it probably should have. My phone immediately buzzed with a text from her. Probably something scathing about my attitude or my immaturity or my complete failure as a husband. I didn't read it. Instead, I opened my messages, typed out one line, and hit send before I could second guess this myself. You will regret it. 3 words, simple, clean, direct. I watched the delivered notification appear under the message, then switch my phone to do not disturb mode. Let her sit with that for a while. Let her wonder what I meant. Let her call back 50 times if she wanted to. I wouldn't hear it. I turned back to my computer, cracked my knuckles like some kind of hacker in a movie, and opened a folder I'd labeled insurance policy about 3 years ago. Inside were files with names like system_architecture_master_doc and access_protocols original text and most importantly failsafe_fa. Hi. I'd created Failsafe Alpha during the company's second year back when I still believe Clara and I were partners in every sense of the word. It was supposed to be a safety mechanism, a way to protect the company's infrastructure if we ever got hacked or if someone tried to steal our proprietary systems. I'd buried it deep in the code. Told Clara it was standard security protocol and she nodded without understanding a single word because technical details bored her unless they directly translated to $signs. What I hadn't told her was that Failsafe Alpha had a very specific trigger condition, one that could only be activated by someone with my exact security credentials and knowledge of the system architecture. And what it did when activated wasn't exactly protect the company. It was more like, well, let's call it aggressive restructuring. I opened the file, scrolled through the code, checking connections and dependencies. Everything was still there, still functional, still waiting. The company ran on servers I'd built using software I'd designed with security protocols I'd implemented. Clara owned the name and the client relationships. I owned everything else. She just didn't know it yet. My phone lit up on the desk. Clara calling again, then a text, then another call. I ignored all of it, focused on my screen. There was a certain poetry to this, I thought. She'd call me from 30 feet away to tell me I didn't exist. Soon, I'd show her what happened when the things she couldn't see decided to stop existing, too. I checked the time. 11:47 p.m. Plenty of time before midnight. Plenty of time to make sure everything was ready. I opened a beer from the mini fridge under my desk. A gift from my buddy Marcus, who told me every home office needed one, and took a long drink. Then I positioned my fingers over the keyboard and smiled. Let's see how you like being on the receiving end of a notification, Clara. I poured myself a drink, whiskey, the good stuff I kept hidden in the back of my desk drawer behind old cables, and a user manual for a printer we didn't even own anymore. Clara thought I only drank beer, which was hilarious considering how little she actually paid attention to anything I did. The whiskey was a 12-year-old single malt I'd bought myself last Christmas when Clara had given me a gift card to Best Buy with a note that said, for whatever tech thing you need. Romantic, right? Really captures that holiday magic. I sat at my desk, the amber liquid catching the light from my monitor, and opened my laptop properly. Not the sanitized corporate-approved laptop that Jennings & Company had issued me with all its tracking software and restrictions, but my personal machine, the one with the good processor, the encrypted hard drive, and absolutely zero connections to Clara's digital empire except for the ones I deliberately maintained as insurance. This was my kingdom. This cluttered desk with its coffee-stained mouse pad and the action figure of Iron Man that my nephew had given me 3 birthdays ago because he said I fixed stuff like Tony Stark. Kid had no idea how right he was. The thing about Jennings & Company that nobody really understood, including and especially Clara, was that it wasn't her company. Not really. Sure, her name was on the door, her face was on the website. Her signature was on all the contracts. But the actual company, the beating heart of it, that was all me. I had built its internal systems from the ground up, starting from that dingy 1-bedroom apartment we'd shared when we were still pretending to be equals. Back when she'd look at me with something resembling respect and say things like, "We're going to build something amazing together." Instead of, "Pick it up." I'd constructed every server, every database, every line of automation that made the company run smoother than Clara's carefully maintained public image. The client tracking AI that everyone raved about. Mine. The predictive analytics that helped close deals before competitors even knew they were on the table. Mine. The security protocols that had protected the company from 3 separate attempted cyber attacks. Oh, mine. I'd even built the internal messaging system they used, the one that was currently probably lighting up like Times Square with panicked messages from Clara trying to figure out what my cryptic text had meant. Clara owned the spotlight. She was good at that part. I give her credit. She could walk into a room and make everyone believe she was the smartest person there. Could spin narratives about innovation and disruption that made investors open their wallets like hypnotized cult members. But I own the code. And the code, my friends, had a very special switch. I pulled up the system architecture files, the ones that mapped out every connection, every dependency, every single point where data flowed through the company's digital infrastructure. It looked like a circuit board designed by someone on a caffeine bender. Lines connecting to more lines. Each one representing hours of work, late nights, sacrificed weekends. There were sections I'd built during our honeymoon for crying out loud because Clara had gotten an urgent call from a potential client and I'd needed to set up a demo environment while she smoothed them at a beach bar in Cancun. And they're buried about 17 layers deep in a subsystem labeled security_protocols_redundant_backup_v7, a name so boring that no one would ever bother to actually investigate it was failoff_fa. My masterpiece, my insurance policy, my nuclear option. I created it during year 2 of the company back when things were still growing fast and I was naive enough to think Clara would eventually add my name to the incorporation papers like she promised. Let's wait until we're more established. She'd said it looks better to investors if there's a single clear leader. You understand, right? And I'd nodded like an idiot, believing that more established would eventually arrive, not realizing it was corporate speak for never. Failsafe_alpha was supposed to be a safety mechanism, a way to protect everything I'd built if something catastrophic happened. If we got hacked, if a disgruntled employee tried to steal proprietary code, if the company got hostile takeover bid and someone tried to lock me out of my own systems. It was the digital equivalent of a self-destruct button, except instead of destroying everything, it just reorganized things aggressively, chaotically, permanently. The beauty of it was in its simplicity. One command executed with my specific credentials would trigger a cascade of automated processes that would make the company's entire digital infrastructure have what I come to think of as a very public nervous breakdown. Contracts would auto-cancel. Financial reports would show false liquidation alerts. The AI would start making decisions based on corrupted datasets. Client databases would become temporarily inaccessible. Stock valuations would plummet. And the best part, it would all look like a catastrophic system failure. The kind of thing that happens when a company grows too fast and doesn't invest enough in proper IT infrastructure, which ironically was exactly what Clara had done. She'd been so focused on expansion and acquisition and her personal brand that she'd ignored my repeated warnings about system vulnerabilities, about the need for redundancies, about the importance of documentation and proper security protocols. You're being paranoid, she'd said more than once. Just keep everything running. That's your job. Well, now my job was apparently over, so why should I keep anything running? I took another sip of whiskey and thought about the meeting, about that pen rolling across the floor, about the laughter, about Bethany snorting like a malfunctioning printer while Richard muttered domesticated and Clara just sat there accepting their mockery of her husband as perfectly normal and acceptable behavior. I thought about all the dinner parties where I'd been introduced as Clara's husband instead of the CTO, or even just this is my husband who built the company's entire technical infrastructure. I thought about the credit I'd never received, the equity I'd never been granted, the respect I'd been systematically denied. And then I thought about that phone call, that cold, calculated corporate termination disguised as a marriage ending. I've chosen to sever all contact, stay away forever. Like I was a vendor whose contract wasn't being renewed. Like 8 years of my life were just a line item she was removing from her budget. My fingers moved across the keyboard almost of their own accord, pulling up terminal windows and security access points. I verified my credentials, still active, because of course Clara hadn't thought to revoke my system access. Why would she? She probably assumed I'd just quietly pack my things and disappear like a good little dismissed employee. Maybe send her a fruit basket and a thank you note for the privilege of having served. I checked the company's current status. All systems operational. Servers running smoothly. The automated processes I'd built humming along perfectly, making Clara money while she slept, completely oblivious to how fragile her empire actually was. I could see the real-time data flowing through client transactions, processing reports, generating the AI, making micro decisions about resource allocation. It was beautiful in a way, a complex machine operating flawlessly because I designed it to operate flawlessly for her. I opened another window and pulled up the company's current stock valuation. Trading had closed for the day, but the after-hours numbers looked good. Really good. The company was valued at just over $3.22 billion, which was frankly insane considering we'd started in that cramped apartment with a dream and my coding skills. Clara had been profiled in Forbes last month, featured in their 30 Under 40 issue, even though she was 37, but apparently they'd made an exception because her visionary leadership was just that impressive. The article hadn't mentioned me once, not even in the acknowledgements. I wondered what Forbes would write about tomorrow. The clock in the corner of my screen ticked over. 11:52 p.m. I had 8 minutes until midnight. Not that midnight was significant in any practical sense. The code would work just as well at 11:53 or 12:47 or 3 o'clock in the morning. But there was something poetic about it, something cinematically satisfying about timing the fall of Clara's empire to coincide with the death of one day and the birth of another. New beginnings and all that inspirational poster nonsense. I pulled up the Failsafe Alpha file one more time, scrolling through the code to make absolutely sure I hadn't missed anything. Every function was intact. Every trigger was properly configured. Every cascade protocol was ready to execute. The code was clean, elegant, even some of my best work, which was saying something considering the quality of what I'd built for this company. My phone buzzed again. Another call from Clara number 47. If I was counting correctly, which I was because I'm petty like that. I let it go to voicemail, imagining her in her study, probably pacing now, her carefully maintained composure cracking as I refused to respond to her summons. She wasn't used to being ignored. She wasn't used to not getting immediate compliance when she demanded something. This had to be driving her absolutely insane. Good. I finished my whiskey, set the glass down with a satisfying clink against the wooden desk, and positioned my hands over the keyboard. My heart was doing this weird thing where it felt both calm and racing at the same time, like my body couldn't decide if this was terrifying or exhilarating. Probably both. Definitely both. 11:58 p.m. I thought about calling someone, my brother maybe, or my college roommate Dave, just to have someone witness this moment. But no, this was something I needed to do alone. This was between me and Clara and 8 years of accumulated disrespect. 11:59 p.m. I took a breath, then another. My fingers rested on the keys, ready. You know what, Clara? I said out loud to the empty room. You were right about one thing. I don't exist. Not to you, anyway. But let me show you what happens when something that doesn't exist decides to stop pretending. The clock hit 1159 and 30 seconds. I typed the command, enter my credentials, verified the execution parameters one final time. 11:59 and 50 seconds. My cursor hovered over the enter key. See you on the other side, I whispered. And at exactly 11:59 and 59 seconds p.m., I pressed enter. The screen flickered once like it was taking a breath before a performance. And then all hell broke loose in the most beautiful catastrophic way I'd ever witnessed. At exactly 11:59 p.m., the moment my finger left the enter key, every server that powered Jennings and Company started screaming like a kettle on full boil. Not literally screaming. Obviously, servers don't have vocal cords. But the system monitoring dashboard I had pulled up on my second screen erupted into a light show of red alerts, error messages, and warning notifications that would have made a Christmas tree jealous. I sat back in my chair, cracked open another beer, and watched the digital apocalypse unfold with the kind of satisfaction usually reserved for watching your favorite sports team score a game-winning touchdown. Except this was better than any sports game, because I wasn't just watching. I'd written the entire playbook. The first thing Failsafe_Alpha did was target the automated contract management system, the crown jewel of the company's operations. This was the AI-powered beauty that handled client agreements, renewals, and those sweet recurring revenue streams that made investors salivate. I'd spent 9 months perfecting it, teaching it to recognize patterns, flag opportunities, and essentially print money while Clara took all the credit during board meetings. Now, at 12:01 a.m., it had developed a sudden and aggressive case of amnesia mixed with what could only be described as suicidal tendencies. High-value contracts started auto-canceling. Not the small ones, that would have been too subtle. No, Failsafe Alpha went straight for the jugular, targeting the top 50 clients by revenue. Companies that paid us 6 and 7 figures annually suddenly received automated emails informing them that Jennings and Company was restructuring operations and would be unable to continue service effective immediately. The emails were professionally worded naturally. I'd written them years ago as templates, but their timing and volume was about as professional as a bull in a china shop wearing roller skates. I watched the activity log scroll past on my screen. Each line representing another severed revenue stream. Another broken relationship, another nail in the coffin of Clara's empire. It was poetry in motion. If poetry could be written in Python and executed with ruthless efficiency. By 12:03 a.m., the financial reporting system had joined the party. This was the part one was particularly proud of the piece to resistance, if you will. The system started triggering false liquidation alerts, sending automated notifications to investors and board members that the company was entering emergency shutdown protocols. The notifications looked official because they were official. I'd built them into the system as part of the disaster recovery procedures that Clara had approved without reading. The irony was delicious. Stock market algorithms that monitored after hours, company communications picked up these alerts immediately. Even though the markets were closed, the automated trading systems that ran 24/7 started adjusting their models, recalculating Jennings and Company's valuation based on what appeared to be a complete corporate meltdown. I pulled up a financial tracking site and watched in real time as the company's theoretical value began to nosedive faster than my faith in marriage. 3.2 billion at 11:59 p.m., 3.1 billion at 12:04 a.m., 2.9 billion at 12:06 a.m. It was like watching a countdown clock, except instead of counting seconds, it was counting Clara's net worth circling the drain. By 12:07 a.m., the client database had decided to take an unscheduled vacation. Not deleted. I wasn't a monster, just temporarily encrypted with a key that only I possessed to anyone trying to access it. The system would report catastrophic data corruption and recommend immediate IT intervention. The kind of IT intervention that would cost millions and take weeks, assuming they could find someone who understood my architecture well enough to even attempt repairs. Spoiler alert, they couldn't because I deliberately made the documentation about as helpful as assembly instructions written in ancient Samrian. The AI systems were really getting into the spirit. Now, the predictive analytics engine, which normally suggested optimal resource allocation and client engagement strategies, had apparently decided that the optimal strategy was chaos. It started making recommendations like divest all assets immediately and liquidate all holdings. And my personal favorite, terminate all employment contracts and flee to a non-extradition country. I hadn't programmed that last one. The AI had genuinely gone off the rails in the most entertaining way possible. At 12:10 a.m., I decided to check in on the company's Slack workspace. Because if there's one thing I'd learned about corporate America, it's that when stuff hits the fan, everyone runs to Slack to panic. Collectively, I'd maintained admin access to the workspace. Naturally, and set my status to invisible so I could lurk like a ghost at my own company's funeral. The main channels were exploding. The first message had appeared at 12:02 a.m. from Dylan, the night shift system administrator, who probably thought this was going to be a quiet Tuesday night of Netflix and occasionally checking server logs. Dylan, guys, anyone else seeing weird behavior in the contract system that had been followed approximately 30 seconds later by Dylan? Okay, never mind. Everything is on fire. Dylan, not literally fire, but like digital fire. Dylan, someone call someone. The IT channel had devolved into complete pandemonium. Messages were flying faster than I could read them. A stream of consciousness panic attacks spread across multiple employees who were apparently all working late or had been woken up by automated alert systems. Sarah DevOps, all servers reporting critical failures simultaneously. James _backend. How is that even possible? Sarah _DevOps. I don't know, James. That's why I'm asking. Marcus _IT contract system just sent termination notices to Lex. Sarah _DevOps. Lex is our biggest client. Marcus was our biggest client. I took a sip of beer and scrolled through more channels. The executive team's private channel, which I'd been removed from 3 months ago, but had maintained backdoor access to because I'm not an idiot, was even better. Richard, the CFO who'd found my humiliation this morning so amusing, had posted at 12:11 a.m. Richard CFO, what's happening? Richard CFO, someone explain to me why Bloomberg is reporting we're in liquidation. Richard CFO, our stock projection just dropped $2.1 billion. Diane, VP of Operations, chimed in with her characteristic grace under pressure. Diane _ops, this can't be real. Diane _ops, this has to be a hack. Diane _ops, we're down $3.1 billion. And then at 12:15 a.m., the message I'd been waiting for appeared, written in all caps with the fury of 1,000 suns. Claire CEO, fix this now. Claire CEO, I want every single person on this platform working on solutions immediately. Claire CEO, someone get our lead developer on the line. I laughed out loud at that one, the sound echoing in my empty office. Lead developer. That's what she called me when she needed something fixed, when my actual title was apparently too complicated or too generous for regular use. I wondered how long it would take someone to point out that the lead developer was her soon-to-be ex-husband who she just fired via phone call from 30 feet away. Marcus from marketing, not the same Marcus as Marcus _it, because apparently every tech company is legally required to employ multiple people named Marcus, provided the answer. Marcus _marketing. Clara, isn't that your husband? The chat went silent for approximately 15 seconds, which in Slack time felt like an eternity. Then, Claire _CO, someone else, get someone else. Claire CEO, call external consultants. Claire_co, call anyone. Richard CFO, we're down 95% market cap in 17 minutes. I checked the financial tracker again. He wasn't exaggerating. From 3.2 billion to 160 million in less than 20 minutes. That had to be some kind of record. I should probably check the Guinness Book of World Records. See if there was a Category 4 fastest destruction of a tech company by a scorned spouse. My phone, which I'd left on Do Not Disturb, showed 73 missed calls. 60 from Clara. The rest distributed among various board members and executives who'd somehow gotten my personal number and were presumably calling to either beg for help or threaten legal action. Maybe both. I ignored all of them, far too invested in watching the Slack drama unfold. At 12:17 a.m., someone, I think it was one of the junior developers, made the mistake of asking the question everyone was thinking. Kevin_dev, could this be an inside job? The chat exploded again. Everyone had theories: disgruntled former employees, corporate espionage, Russian hackers, Chinese intelligence. One person suggested it might be aliens, which honestly wasn't the worst theory I'd heard tonight. But then Dylan, bless Dylan, who'd been frantically trying to stop the digital bleeding for the past 15 minutes, posted something that made me sit up straighter. Dylan, all the core processes are being terminated by authenticated admin credentials. Dylan, these aren't external attacks. Dylan, someone with Godl access is doing this from inside the system. Sarah DevOps, who is Godl access? Dylan, according to the logs, only one person. I watched the chat, waiting to see if he'd say it, if he'd connect the dots. Dylan, the original system architect. There was a pause then. Marcus wasn't that Sarah DevOps. Oh, Clara CEO. Don't you dare say his name. Too late, Clara. Way too late. I opened a new terminal window, typed out one final command, and posted it directly into the company's main Slack channel for everyone to see. It was petty, immature, and absolutely worth it. Hey, maybe try picking it off the ground. Then I revoked my own Slack access, closed my laptop, and leaned back in my chair with the biggest smile I'd had in 8 years. Game, set, match. I made it exactly 47 minutes before my phone achieved what I can only describe as technological sentience and decided to have a complete mental breakdown. Even with Do Not Disturb turned on, the thing kept lighting up on my desk like a possessed Christmas ornament, vibrating so aggressively that it was slowly inching its way across the wood surface like some kind of desperate electronic slug trying to escape its own existence. I'd read somewhere that smartphones could theoretically overheat from excessive use, and I was genuinely starting to worry that mine might achieve nuclear fusion and take out the entire home office. By 1:15 a.m., I'd received 217 missed calls. I know this because I made the mistake of checking, thinking maybe the chaos had died down, and people had accepted their fate with grace and dignity. Spoiler alert, they had not. The call log read like a who's who of corporate America's worst nightmare. Board members, investors, Clara's personal assistant, Bethany, the CFO, Richard, who'd found my humiliation so entertaining just 12 hours ago, and even some numbers I didn't recognize, which meant people were giving out my contact info like Halloween candy to anyone who might possibly be able to fix this catastrophe. There were voicemails, too. So many voicemails. My inbox had apparently reached its maximum capacity at 50 messages and just gave up, which honestly felt like a metaphor for something, but I was too busy being petty to analyze it. I listened to exactly 3 of them before deciding that I valued my sanity more than I valued entertainment. The first was from Richard, sounding like he was having a legitimate panic attack. Pick up, pick up, pick up. I don't care what happened between you and Clara. The company is hemorrhaging value. Like I don't even have a metaphor. It's just bad. Call me back immediately. We'll pay you whatever you want. Name your price. I'm serious. I will personally write you a check right now if you. The message cut off there, presumably because he'd exceeded the time limit. The second was from Diane, VP of Operations, who'd apparently decided that anger was the best approach. I don't know what you think you're doing, but this is criminal. Criminal. We will sue you for everything you have. You'll never work in this industry again. You'll delete. The third was from Clara's mother, Patricia, which was unexpected. Patricia had never liked me. Had made it abundantly clear from day one that her daughter was marrying down by choosing a tech guy instead of a lawyer or a doctor or literally anyone else with a more respectable pedigree. Her message was exactly what I'd expected. I always knew you were trouble. Poor Clara dealing with a vindictive child throwing a tantrum. When she divorces you, she'll take everything. You know, everything. My lawyers will make sure. Delete. Delete. Super delete. By 1:47 a.m., The missed calls had climbed to 392. My phone was no longer vibrating. It was having a full-on seizure. I watched it dance across my desk, buzzing and lighting up in a rhythm that was almost hypnotic. Call from Clara. Call from unknown number. Call from Richard again. Call from someone labeled Jennings board. Emergency. Call from Clara. Call from another unknown number. It was like watching a slot machine that only paid out in anxiety and professional consequences. I decided this was as good a time as any for a snack break. I walked to the kitchen, leaving my possessed phone behind to have its electronic meltdown in peace. The house was quiet except for the distant muffled buzzing coming from my office, which sounded vaguely like an angry bee had been trapped in a jar. I opened the pantry, Clara's meticulously organized pantry, where everything was arranged by category and color because she'd seen it on some home organization influencer's Instagram, and pulled out a bag of microwave popcorn. The butter lover's kind, because if you're going to watch your ex-wife's empire crumble in real time, you might as well do it with proper snacks. The microwave hummed to life, and I stood there watching the bag expand and rotate, listening to the kernels pop in increasingly rapid succession. There was something meditative about it, honestly. Pop, 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 pop. Kind of like the sound of Clara's net worth disappearing now that I thought about it. When the popcorn was done, I grabbed a beer from the fridge, my third of the night, but who was counting besides me, and headed back to my office. My phone had given up trying to move and was just lying there on the desk, screen flashing desperately. The notification count had stopped updating at 99+, which was Apple's way of saying, "Dude, seriously, what is happening in your life right now?" I picked up the phone, scrolled through the recent calls with mild interest while munching popcorn. There were some interesting additions to the list. Now, a number with a New York area code that my caller ID helpfully informed me was from Goldman Sachs Private Wealth Management. A call from someone named Trevor Marks, Wall Street Journal, which presumably meant the Wall Street Journal was already circling like a shark that smelled blood in the water. Several calls from law firms with names that sounded like they cost $1,000 an hour just to pronounce. And Clara. So many calls from Clara. The timestamps told a story of increasing desperation. 12:47 a.m., 12:51 a.m., 12:55 a.m., 102 a.m., 104 a.m., 106 a.m., 107 a.m. That last cluster of 3 calls in 4 minutes suggested she'd progressed from anger to full panic, which made sense given that her $3 billion company was currently worth less than a decent house in San Francisco. At 2 a.m. exactly, I checked my phone one final time before committing to a proper movie night. The missed call counter had reached a beautiful poetic number, 540. 540 calls in just over 2 hours. That averaged out to about 4.5 calls per minute, which honestly seemed excessive even for a corporate apocalypse. I'd crashed one company, not the entire stock market. I turned my phone completely off. Not just do not disturb, but fully powered down and settled on my comfortable couch with my popcorn and beer. The TV remote sat on the coffee table next to Clara's collection of interior design magazines that she never actually read, but kept around because they made her look cultured. I grabbed the remote and opened Netflix, scrolling through options. What does one watch while their ex-wife's empire burns down in real time? An action movie felt too intense. A drama felt redundant given that I was living through enough drama for 3 Shakespearean plays. A documentary seemed too educational. Then I saw it sitting there in my continue watching queue, The Office. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. I queued up Season 5 Episode 14, Stress Relief. The one where Dwight stages a fire drill that goes horribly wrong and everyone panics. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I hit play and settled in. Watching as Dwight locked all the doors and set a trash can on fire while shouting, "The fire is shooting at us." Mood, I said to my empty living room, raising my beer and a solitary toast. By 3:30 a.m., I'd finished 4 episodes and 2 bags of popcorn. My phone remained blissfully off, sitting on my desk like a deactivated bomb. Somewhere out there, Clara was probably still frantically trying to reach me, mobilizing every contact she had, calling in every favor, desperately searching for someone, anyone who could reverse what I'd done. The mental image of her in her designer pajamas, pacing her study at 3 o'clock in the morning with her perfectly styled hair falling apart and her mascara running brought me more joy than it probably should have. I thought about turning my phone back on just to see how high the missed call counter had climbed. But no, that would ruin the surprise for tomorrow morning. Let the number accumulate. Let Clara and her board and her investors and her lawyers all scream into the void while I sat here in my comfortable clothes, eating junk food and watching Jim Halpert play pranks on Dwight Schrute as the sun started to peek through my windows around 5:47 a.m., painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that Clara would probably describe as uninspired or pedestrian. I pulled up the news on my laptop. I wasn't surprised to see that Jennings and Company's collapse had made headlines, but I was impressed by how fast the media had picked up on it. Tech giant Jennings and CEO suffers catastrophic system failure. Bloomberg: Jennings and CEO loses $3 billion in market value overnight. Wall Street Journal: the fastest corporate collapse in state history. Financial Times: that last one made me laugh out loud. The fastest corporate collapse in state history. They'd probably want to interview me for the behind-the-scenes story. Eventually, maybe I'd write a book. How to Destroy a Billion-Dollar Company in 20 Minutes. A memoir by a guy who was told to pick up a pen. I closed my laptop, stretched, and looked around my office. My space full of my things, free from Clara's minimalist design philosophy and color-coordinated. The sun was fully up now, marking the beginning of what was technically Wednesday, but felt more like the first day of the rest of my life. Outside, birds were chirping. Inside, my phone was off and my conscience was clear. The news could call it the fastest corporate collapse in state history if they wanted. I called it Tuesday. I woke up around 10 a.m. on Wednesday morning, feeling more refreshed than I had in approximately 3 years, which was coincidentally around the time Clara had stopped pretending our marriage was anything other than a business arrangement with occasional awkward dinner parties. My neck didn't hurt from sleeping on the couch. I'd actually made it to the bed around 6 a.m. and for the first time in recent memory, I didn't wake up with that familiar knot of dread in my stomach that usually accompanied the thought of existing in the same house as my wife. Ex-wife, soon to be ex-wife, whatever the legal terminology was for a woman who tried to fire me from our marriage via phone call. I showered, shaved, and put on my best suit, the charcoal gray Tom Ford that I bought for our 5th anniversary dinner, and that Clara had immediately criticized for being too flashy, even though it cost less than one of her weekly blowout appointments. I paired it with a crisp white shirt, my favorite tie with the subtle geometric pattern, and the watch my brother had given me when I'd graduated college with my computer science degree. The watch was nothing fancy, just a reliable Seiko, but it kept perfect time and hadn't once tried to publicly humiliate me, which made it more valuable than most of the people I'd be seeing today. By 10:47 a.m., I was walking into the Jennings and Company building like I own the place, which technically I kind of did from a built-every system that makes this building function perspective. Even if Clara's name was on all the paperwork, the lobby was chaos incarnate. People were speed walking in every direction like extras in a disaster movie. Their faces painted with various shades of panic and disbelief. The receptionist, a normally unflappable woman named Sandra who'd worked the front desk for 6 years, looked like she'd aged a decade overnight. Her eyes were red-rimmed and she was on the phone with someone saying, "I don't know," over and over again with increasing desperation. She saw me walk in and her eyes went wide. She dropped the phone. Literally just let it fall from her hand while whoever was on the other end kept talking and stared at me like I was a ghost or a bomb or a ghost carrying a bomb. "Hi, Sandra," I said cheerfully, giving her a little wave. "Crazy morning, huh?" She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again, and then just pointed toward the elevators with a shaking finger. No words, just pointing. I took that as permission to proceed. The elevator ride to the 14th floor, where the main boardroom lived in all its unnecessary marble and mahogany glory, was accompanied by a truly excellent music-hack version of Don't Stop Believing, which felt appropriate given the circumstances. I hummed along, checking my reflection in the polished elevator doors. I looked good, rested, maybe even happy. This was going to be fun. The 14th floor was even worse than the lobby. It looked like a bomb had gone off. If bombs were made of paper and existential dread. Documents were scattered everywhere. Coffee cups abandoned on every available surface. And at least 3 people were crying. Not discreet professional crying either. Fulone mascara running, gasping for air, sobbing. A junior analyst whose name I thought was Todd or Brad or some other generic tech bro name was sitting on the floor with his laptop rocking back and forth slightly while staring at a screen. The boardroom doors were closed, but I could hear shouting from inside. Multiple voices, all talking over each other in that special kind of cacophony that only happens when very important people suddenly realize they're not as important as they thought they were. I straightened my tie, plastered on my biggest smile, and pushed open the doors. The scene inside was spectacular. The massive conference table that had witnessed yesterday's pin incident was now covered in laptops, tablets, printed financial reports, and what looked like someone's half-eaten bagel with lox. Papers were everywhere, on the table, on the chairs, scattered across the floor like confetti at the world's most depressing party. The CFO, Richard, looked like he'd aged 20 years since yesterday. His normally perfectly coiffed hair sticking up at weird angles like he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. His shirt was untucked on one side, and he had the wild-eyed expression of a man who'd just watched his retirement fund evaporate. Diane, The VP of Operations was on her phone, pacing near the windows, her voice shrill enough to probably shatter glass. I don't care what time it is in London. Get them on the phone now. She was still wearing yesterday's clothes, which suggested she'd been here all night, which was both sad and hilarious. Marcus from marketing was slumped in a chair, scrolling through his phone with the defeated posture of someone reading their own obituary. Bethany, Clara's assistant, was crying into a tissue while simultaneously trying to take notes on her iPad, creating what I imagined was a very damp and illable record of the proceedings. And then there was Clara. She was standing at the head of the table. Both hands pressed flat against the surface like she was physically holding it down to keep it from floating away. Her designer blouse was wrinkled. Her perfect hair pulled back in a messy ponytail that looked more hostage situation than casual chic. And her makeup was smeared in a way that suggested she'd been crying, but was trying very hard to pretend she hadn't been. When she looked up and saw me standing in the doorway, her expression went through about 15 different emotions in 3 seconds. Shock, rage, desperation, hate, and something that might have been hope, but died quickly when she remembered why I was probably there. You, she said, her voice cracking slightly on that single syllable. The room went silent. Everyone turned to look at me. Richard's mouth fell open. Diane stopped mid-sentence, her phone forgotten at her ear. Marcus sat up straighter. Even Bethany stopped crying long enough to stare. Me? I confirmed cheerfully, walking into the room like I was arriving at a garden party instead of a corporate funeral. Good morning, everyone. Beautiful day outside. Anyone catch the sunrise? No. Too busy watching your stock value circle the drain? Understandable. You destroyed everything. Clara's voice cracked again and she pushed off from the table, taking a step toward me. Her hands were shaking. Actually shaking. I'd never seen Clara lose her composure like this. Not even when we'd lost our first major client in year 1. Not even when her father had died. She'd always been ice cold, perfectly controlled, the queen who never showed weakness. But right now, she looked absolutely shattered. I smiled. The kind of smile that I'd been practicing in the mirror this morning while brushing my teeth, calm, collected, maybe even a little amused. Oh, come on, Clara. You did that when you dropped the pen. The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a knife and served it at a dinner party. It was delicious. Absolutely delicious. I could see the realization spreading across everyone's faces. The connection between yesterday's casual humiliation and today's corporate apocalypse. Richard actually gasped. Diane's phone slipped from her hand and clattered to the floor. Marcus whispered, "Holy shit." Under his breath. Clara's face went through several more color changes, pale to red to an interesting shade of purple that probably wasn't medically advisable. She lunged for her phone on the table, her movements jerky and desperate. "Security," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm calling security." "Too late," I said, still smiling. I pulled a folder from under my arm. I'd been carrying it this whole time, but nobody had noticed because they were too busy having collective breakdowns and tossed it onto the table. It landed with a satisfying top that made Bethany jump. I've already transferred my ownership patents and algorithm licenses to a new firm. Everything I built, every line of code, every system architecture, every proprietary algorithm, it's all legally mine. And as of 7:32 this morning, it all belongs to ArcForge Technologies. ArcForge, Richard croaked, finally finding his voice. What the hell is ArcForge? I turned to look at him, my smile growing wider. My firm, Richard, my company, the one I built this morning while you were all busy panicking. Funny thing about intellectual property law, when you never put your partner's name on any of the legal documents, despite 8 years of promises, they retain ownership of everything they create. Clara owns the name Jennings & Company and the client relationships. I own everything else. I watched the implications sink in across their faces. Without the systems I'd built, Jennings & Company was just an empty shell with a fancy name. They had nothing to sell, no infrastructure to support clients, no AI to automate processes. They were a car dealership without any cars, a restaurant without a kitchen. You can't do this, Diane said, but her voice lacked conviction. She knew I could. They all knew I could. Already did, I replied. I looked around the room one more time, taking in the destruction, the panic, the beautiful chaos that I'd created with one command and 8 years of contingency planning. Oh, and by the way, Jerry and Priya from your board, they called me this morning. They're joining ArcForge as senior advisors. They said they loved my sense of humor. That wasn't entirely true yet. Jerry and Priya had sent inquiring emails, but we hadn't finalized anything. But the looks on everyone's faces made the embellishment worth it. Clara just stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish drowning in air. For once in her life, she had absolutely nothing to say. I straightened my tie one more time and headed for the door. Before I left, I turned back, catching Clara's devastated expression one last time. "Oh, and Clara, if you drop your pen today, pick it up yourself." The door closed behind me with a satisfying click, and I walked toward the elevator with my head held high, leaving the wreckage of Clara's empire scattered across that conference room like the world's most expensive jigsaw puzzle. 48 hours. That's all it took for ArcForge Technologies to go from a spite-fueled idea I'd incorporated while eating popcorn and watching The Office to the hottest name in the tech industry. 48 hours for my newly minted company to trend globally on Twitter, LinkedIn, and even TikTok, where some finance bro with exceptionally good hair had made a video about the fastest revenge glow-up in tech history that got something like 4 million views. I didn't have TikTok. I valued my attention span, but my nephew sent me the link with approximately 17 fire emojis and the message, "Uncle, you're famous." I'd spent Wednesday afternoon after leaving the Jennings & Company boardroom doing what any reasonable person would do after destroying their ex-wife's billion-dollar empire. I went to Costco and bought a rotisserie chicken because spite is hungry work and I'd been living off popcorn and beer for 36 hours. Then I went home, set up a proper office space in my spare bedroom, the one Clara had always insisted should be a meditation room that she never once meditated in, and got to work building something that was actually mine. The incorporation papers for ArcForge Technologies were filed by 6 p.m. Wednesday. I'd chosen the name during the drive home from Costco, sitting at a red light and eating chicken straight from the container like some kind of caveman entrepreneur. Arc because it sounded tech-forward and also reminded me of an arc reactor from Iron Man, and Forge because I was literally forging a new company from the ashes of my failed marriage. Also, it sounded cool, which matters more than people want to admit when naming companies. By Thursday morning, my inbox looked like it had been hit by a bomb made of opportunity. Investors who'd fled Jennings & Company like rats abandoning a sinking ship were suddenly very interested in having coffee with me. LinkedIn messages were pouring in so fast that the app kept crashing. My phone, which I'd finally turned back on Wednesday night, had accumulated another 200 missed calls, but this time they weren't from Clara's people screaming at me. They were from venture capital firms, private equity groups, and angel investors who apparently love the narrative of scorned tech genius burns down ex-wife's empire and builds new one from the ashes. The first serious inquiry came from Mitchell Sanderson, a VC from Bay Area Capital who'd actually invested in Jennings & Company series bound 3 years ago. His email was delightfully blunt. "I should be mad at you for tanking my investment. Instead, I want to buy you lunch and hear your pitch for ArcForge." Also, that pen line was legendary. My partners have been quoting it all morning. We met at a steakhouse downtown on Thursday afternoon. Mitchell was one of those guys who looked exactly like what you'd expect from a Silicon Valley venture capitalist. Expensive casual clothes that probably cost more than my first car, designer glasses, a watch that could fund a small country's GDP. He ordered a scotch that was older than most college graduates, and got straight to the point. "What you did was either the most brilliant strategic move I've seen in 10 years or completely insane," he said, swirling his scotch like he was in a whiskey commercial. "I'm betting on brilliant." "What's the pitch?" I laid it out for him. ArcForge Technologies would specialize in enterprise AI solutions and custom software architecture. Essentially everything I'd built for Jennings & Company. But better and without the baggage of a CEO who treated me like the help. I owned all the intellectual property, all the algorithms, all the proprietary systems. I could license them, improve them, or build entirely new solutions from scratch. The market opportunity was massive because, as recent events had proven, most companies had no idea how vulnerable their tech infrastructure actually was. "How vulnerable is most companies' tech infrastructure?" Mitchell asked, leaning forward with interest. I smiled. "Let's just say if their lead developer decides to go rogue, they're probably screwed. Most places don't document properly, don't build redundancies, and definitely don't consider the risk of the person who built everything deciding they're done being treated like garbage." Mitchell laughed. A genuine bark of amusement that made the people at the next table look over. "That's the most honest pitch I've heard in years. Most founders try to blow sunshine up my ass about how they're going to change the world. You're basically saying you're going to profit off corporate dysfunction and terrible management." "Exactly," I said, "and there's a lot of corporate dysfunction to profit from." By the time dessert arrived, some kind of chocolate thing that cost $32 and came with gold flakes because rich people love pretending they're eating precious metals. Mitchell had committed to a seed round of $5 million. $5 million for a company that was barely 2 days old and consisted of me, my laptop, and a business plan I'd written between episodes of The Office. "I'm in," Mitchell said, shaking my hand across the table. Not just because the tech is solid, though it is, but because you've got the best origin story I've ever heard. Husband destroys wife's company after pen incident is going to play extremely well in the media. The narrative basically writes itself. He wasn't wrong. By Friday morning, the Wall Street Journal had published a feature article titled The Fall of Jennings & Company and the Rise of ArcForge, a tech marriage gone wrong. Forbes followed up with how one developer's revenge reshaped the enterprise software landscape. Even Bloomberg got in on the action with a piece analyzing the systemic vulnerabilities exposed by the Jennings collapse. They interviewed industry experts, competitors, and even tried to interview Clara, who'd apparently barricaded herself in her house and wasn't taking calls from anyone except her lawyers and her therapist, presumably in that order. The best part, every single article mentioned the pen. That stupid platinum pen had become the symbol of the entire saga. The inciting incident that launched 1,000 think pieces about workplace respect, marriage dynamics and entrepreneurship and the importance of treating your technical co-founders like actual human beings. Meanwhile, Jennings & Company was in full death spiral mode. The stock had been delisted from major exchanges after emergency trading halts on Wednesday. Clients were fleeing faster than you could say breach of contract. Employees were updating their LinkedIn profiles and sending out resumes en masse. The company that had been worth $3.2 billion on Tuesday was now in active liquidation proceedings worth less than the furniture in its downtown office. Clara's personal net worth, which had been featured in Fortune's list of self-made women billionaires just last month, had reportedly dropped by 97%. The media was having an absolute field day with the reversal. And while part of me felt like I should feel guilty about destroying her life's work, mostly I just remembered that phone call. I've chosen to sever all contact. Stay away forever. Yeah. Well, careful what you wish for, Clara. By Friday afternoon, I'd hired my first 2 employees. Jerry Blackwood and Priya Kapoor had been on Jennings & Company's board for 4 years. Both of them sharp, experienced, and apparently more loyal to good technology than to Claire's ego. Jerry was a former CTO at a Fortune 500 company who'd retired early and gotten bored. Priya was a strategic consultant who specialized in corporate turnarounds and had the kind of network that made things happen. They showed up at my house/Prairie office Friday at 2 p.m. dressed business casual and carrying coffee from the Good Cafe downtown. We sat in my living room, the same living room where I'd eaten pasta alone on Tuesday night, and talked strategy. I have to ask, Jerry said after we'd covered the basics of equity splits and role definitions. What's your leadership philosophy? Every company needs some kind of guiding principle. I thought about it for exactly half a second. The answer was obvious, had been obvious since the moment that pen rolled across the conference room floor. I grinned. If you drop your pen, pick it up yourself. Jerry and Priya looked at each other, then burst out laughing. Real, genuine laughter that filled the room and made me feel for the first time in years like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I love it, Priya said, wiping tears from her eyes. That's going on our website. That's going on business cards. That's going to be our entire corporate culture. Damn right it is, I said, raising my coffee cup. Welcome to ArcForge, where we build great technology and treat people like actual human beings. Revolutionary concept, I know. We clinkied our paper coffee cups together like they were champagne glasses, and I looked around my living room at the beginning of something real, something mine, something that Clara couldn't touch or take credit for or diminish. Outside, the sun was shining. My phone was buzzing with more investor inquiries. And somewhere across town, in a minimalist house that felt more like a museum than a home, my ex-wife was probably sitting in her study, surrounded by lawyers, trying to figure out how her perfect life had imploded in less than a week. I hope she was comfortable. I hope she remembered who built everything she'd lost. And I really hope she'd learned to pick up her own damn pen. 1 week after the fall of Jennings & Company, I was sitting in my new office space on the 23rd floor of a building in the financial district, reviewing contract proposals from 3 different Fortune 500 companies who apparently love the idea of hiring the guy who just pulled off the most spectacular corporate implosion in recent history. The office wasn't huge, about 1,500 square feet, but it was mine. Actually, mine with my name on the lease, my logo on the frosted glass door, and absolutely zero risk of someone telling me the desk I'd chosen wasn't enough. Speaking of the desk, I deliberately chosen the same IKEA model I'd had in our spare bedroom at home. The one Clara had looked at with barely concealed disgust and said made me look like a freelancer working from a coffee shop instead of a serious businessman. It was solid oak, had good cable management, and cost about $300, which meant I could actually afford to spill coffee on it without having an existential crisis about furniture depreciation. I'd paired it with a comfortable ergonomic chair, 2 monitors, and a Spider-Man Funko Pop that my nephew had given me as an office warming gift. The Spider-Man was positioned prominently where clients could see it because if people couldn't handle a CEO who liked comic books, they probably couldn't handle working with me anyway. Jerry had the office next to mine, separated by a glass partition that we could frost for privacy, but usually kept clear because we discovered we both thought better when we could bounce ideas off each other randomly throughout the day. Priya had claimed the corner office with the better view, arguing that as our head of strategic growth, she needed to see the horizon, which Jerry and I suspected was just corporate speak for "I want the nice windows." But we'd agreed because Priya was already bringing in clients faster than we could onboard them. It was around 2:30 on a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 1 week since I'd pressed enter and watched Clara's empire crumble, when our receptionist, Katie, buzzed my desk. Katie was a college student working part-time studying computer science at the State University and had immediately earned my respect by showing up to her interview with a portfolio of side projects and zero tolerance for corporate nonsense. "There's someone here to see you," Katie said through the intercom, her voice doing that thing where it goes up at the end like a question even though it's technically a statement. "She doesn't have an appointment and she won't give her name, but she seems intense." I glanced at my calendar. Nothing scheduled for another hour. "Did she say what it's regarding?" "No. She just asked if you were in and then kind of stood there staring at the door like she's trying to decide whether to come in or burn the building down." Jerry, who could hear the conversation through our open petition, looked up from his laptop and mouthed Clara with raised eyebrows. I shrugged, but my gut told me he was probably right. Who else would show up unannounced and radiate enough intensity to make our unflappable receptionist nervous? "Send her in," I said, leaning back in my chair and trying to decide what facial expression I should wear. Professional, smug, concerned. I settled on neutral curiosity, which was probably the most mature option, even though smug was really calling to me. The door opened and Clara walked in. Except it wasn't the Clara I'd last seen in that boardroom a week ago. And it definitely wasn't the Clara who'd sat at the head of conference tables like she was royalty presiding over her subjects. This Clara looked like she'd been through a war and lost badly. Her hair, usually styled within an inch of its life, was pulled back in a simple ponytail that actually looked like a regular human being had done it instead of a professional who charged $200 an hour. She was wearing jeans. Jeans, which I'd seen her wear exactly twice in 8 years, both times under extreme duress, and a plain sweater that looked like it might have actually come from a normal store instead of some boutique where they serve you champagne while you shop. But it was her eyes that really got me. They were exhausted. The kind of exhausted that comes from not sleeping properly for days, from crying until you run out of tears, from watching everything you'd built collapse, and realizing you couldn't stop it. The ice blue weapons of mass destruction had melted into something that looked almost human, almost vulnerable. No security guards flanked her. No assistant trailed behind taking notes. No photographer documented her arrival for social media. Just Clara standing in my doorway looking smaller somehow, like she'd been physically diminished by the weight of the past week. We stared at each other for a long moment. Through the glass partition, I could see Jerry pretending to work on his laptop while obviously watching us with the intensity of someone binge-watching a reality show finale. From Priya's office, I heard her say something into her phone and then the call abruptly ended. She was definitely listening too. "You humiliated me," Clara said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't accusatory, wasn't angry, it was just sad, a statement of fact delivered by someone who'd had a week to think about what had happened and had come to some kind of conclusion about it. I leaned back in my chair, my $300 IKEA chair that I loved specifically because it annoyed her, and took my time responding. Part of me wanted to go for the jugular to remind her of every slight, every dismissive comment, every time she treated me like I was less than. But looking at her standing there defeated and exhausted, I found I didn't need to. The scoreboard was pretty clear. "No, Clara," I said calmly. "You humiliated yourself. I just sent the invoice." She flinched like I'd slapped her, but she didn't argue. Didn't try to defend herself or shift blame or launch into one of her carefully rehearsed speeches about leadership and tough decisions. She just stood there absorbing the hit, and then her eyes started to wander around my office. She looked at the IKEA desk, the one that wasn't enough. At my dual monitors displaying lines of code and financial projections, at the Spider-Man Funko Pop standing guard next to my coffee mug, at the framed photo of me and my brother at last year's Thanksgiving that I'd hung on the wall because it made me smile, at the whiteboard covered in brainstorming notes and terrible drawings from our strategy session this morning. At the coffee maker in the corner, a nice espresso machine that Jerry had insisted we needed, and a mini fridge stocked with actually good beer instead of the overpriced craft nonsense Clara had always preferred. Her gaze lingered on the desk for a long moment, and I could practically see the memory playing in her head. Her in our spare bedroom doorway 3 years ago, looking at this exact desk with disdain, suggesting I upgrade to something more professional if I wanted to be taken seriously. Me explaining that the desk was fine, that it was functional, that not everything needed to be a status symbol. Her rolling her eyes and walking away like I was a child who didn't understand how the real world worked. Now that desk sat in a successful company's office with my name on the door and investors literally lining up to give me money. The desk hadn't changed. The world's perception of it had, because the person sitting behind it had stopped letting other people define his worth. "This is," Clara started, then stopped. Her hands were shaking slightly. I noticed she clasped them together to hide it. "This is really nice. The office." "Thanks," I said simply. I wasn't going to make this easy for her by filling the awkward silence with small talk or false pleasantries. She'd come here for a reason, and I was curious to see what it was. "Jerry and Priya," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the glass partitions where my 2 employees were now completely abandoning any pretense of working and just openly watching us. They were supposed to be loyal to the company. They were loyal to good business. I corrected. "Turns out that's not the same as being loyal to you." Another flinch. She wrapped her arms around herself like she was cold, even though the office was perfectly comfortable. "The lawyers say, I can't sue you. Something about intellectual property rights and the contracts being insufficient." "Non-existent." I supplied helpfully. "The contracts protecting your ownership were non-existent because you never put my name on anything. Remember, you were going to eventually, but you were waiting until we were more established. Except we were plenty established. You just didn't want to share credit." "I know," she said quietly. And that surprised me. Not the admission, the quiet way she said it. Like she was genuinely accepting responsibility instead of spinning it into something else. "I know I did this. I know I took you for granted. Took everything you built for granted. I waited. There had to be more." Clara Jennings didn't show up at her ex-husband's office to deliver a simple apology. That wasn't her style. Even defeated. "I came here to ask if you'd consider selling the technology back to me," she continued. And there it was. The real reason for this visit. Not all of it, just enough for Jennings and Company to fulfill our existing contracts. "I have investors willing to fund a rebuild, but they need guarantees that we can actually deliver services and without your systems. You have nothing to deliver." I finished. "Yeah, I'm aware. I built it, remember? I can't pay you what it's worth," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "But I can offer you 40% of whatever we rebuild. Partnership equity, your name on everything this time. Real partnership like it should have been from the start." I almost laughed. The audacity of it, coming here after everything and offering me what she should have given me 8 years ago like it was some kind of generous gift instead of the bare minimum of respect. But I didn't laugh because looking at her standing there, I realized something important. I didn't want it. I didn't want to rebuild Jennings and Company. Didn't want 40% of a company that would always have her family name on the door. Didn't want to go back to being someone's partner when I could be my own boss. "No," I said simply. "No." She looked confused, like she'd been so certain I'd jump at the chance. "But you'd be." "I'd be your partner again," I interrupted, "in a company that I already burned down once. CL, I don't want to rebuild your empire. I'm busy building my own." She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Looked around my office one more time at the desk, the monitors, the Spider-Man, the whiteboard, the evidence of something new and mine and untouchable by her. "Right," she said finally. "Of course, I just thought, never mind what I thought." She turned to leave and I let her get all the way to the door before I spoke again. "Clara," she stopped, hand on the door frame, but didn't turn around. "That phone call, I've chosen to sever all contact. Stay away forever. You remember that?" Her shoulders tensed. "Yes. Good. Because that's the last time you get to make demands of me ever. We're done. The company is done. Whatever we were is done. Move on." She stood there for another moment. And I thought maybe she'd turn around, try one more time to convince me or guilt me or manipulate me. But she didn't. She just nodded once, sharp and quick, and walked out of my office without another word. Through the glass, I watched her walk past Katie's desk, past the ArcForge logo on the wall and out into the hallway. The elevator dinged. She stepped inside and then she was gone. Jerry appeared in my doorway approximately 4 seconds later. "Holy dude." "Yeah," I agreed. "You okay?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. Then I smiled. "Yeah, Jerry. I'm actually perfect." Months passed. ArcForge thrived like a plant that finally got moved out of the shade and into actual sunlight. We'd closed deals with 12 major clients, hired 15 employees, and moved into a bigger office space that had an actual break room instead of just a mini fridge and prayers. I'd moved into a downtown loft with exposed brick, hardwood floors, and my dog Baxter, a golden retriever I'd adopted from a shelter who greeted me every day like I was a war hero returning home instead of just some guy who worked from home in sweatpants. Sometimes when I scrolled past news articles about Jennings and Company's liquidation proceedings, I'd smile and whisper to Baxter. Told her she'd regret it. Buddy, he'd wag his tail in solidarity because dogs are excellent at supporting petty vengeance. People asked me if I missed her. Friends, family, that one nosy barista at my regular coffee shop who felt entitled to my life story because I tipped well. I perfected my response. Sure, like I miss dial-up internet. Freedom tasted like espresso and payback. And somewhere in a dusty corporate corner, a platinum pen still waited for someone else to pick it up. Not my problem anymore.